I will be discussing civil rights in America, modern and historical. I will be primarily focusing on racial, sexual, and religious discrimination. To start, what exactly are civil rights? John defines civil rights as power or privileges guaranteed to individuals and protected from arbitrary removal at the hands of government or individuals. This means that every citizen of the United States has rights that are equal and cannot be denied due to race, ethnicity, gender, or anything else like that. There are many types of discrimination, but these that have the most prevalence in today's society are racial, sexual, and religious. Racial discrimination is discrimination by racial background or ethnicity. Sexual discrimination is discrimination based on gender. And religious discrimination is discrimination based on religious preference. Like I said, racial discrimination is discrimination by racial background or ethnicity. And one of the first cases cited of racial discrimination is Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. What happened was Plessy was a 7/8 white and he was only 1/8 African American, but they still wouldn't let him in Louisiana on the only whites bus. So he sued it and said that it was racial discrimination, and this is where the Supreme Court came up with the separate but equal doctrine. And another instance of it is the Brown versus the Board of Education 1 and 2 in 1954 and 1955 respectively, where Brown tried to prove basically that separate but equal in and of itself is racial discrimination. Discrimination is still an issue today, and there are a lot of myths associated with discrimination, such as that it's no longer an issue, that perfect equality has been achieved in today's society because it is not, and only minorities suffer from discrimination. There's a process called reverse discrimination. One case cited of it is Regents of the University of California versus Bakke, where Bakke applied to medical school twice, but he was denied both times because he was white, and the spots they had reserved were for minorities only. Some facts that are pertaining to racial discrimination is that discrimination still occurs in many parts of the country, and some education systems, primarily in the South, still have discriminating values. Just this past year in 2013, Lee County, Alabama school districts had a meeting with the Board of Education, the United States Board of Education, talking about how they will no longer discriminate against placing African Americans in advanced placement programs or honors programs. Sexual discrimination, like I said, is the discrimination based on gender. And a closely related term is sexism, which John describes as the invidious sex discrimination. The enfranchisement of women in 1920 was a start to gender equality, but by no means was it a sign of equality at the time. And there was an idea known as protectionism up until the 1970s, and protectionism basically talked about that women needed protected from the cruelties in life, therefore they couldn't be equal to men. Sexual discrimination today is still very much an issue. There are employers that are still hesitant for women to be working high-risk jobs because they consider women biologically inferior, so they don't want to place them in a place where they could get hurt. Also, the delay of the Equal Pay Act of 1963 still hasn't taken full effect. Statistics say that men make average like January to January, whatever they make, but for a woman to make that same amount, she would have to work from January to April. And there's a class action suit currently filed against Walmart that's going to the Supreme Court because a woman felt like she was being discriminated against for her job because she wasn't promoted and all the men were promoted. And there were actually sexual discriminatory slurs against her that said such. The third type of discrimination is religious discrimination, and it's also we see in history as well as today. The most obvious form of religious discrimination would be the World War II Jewish genocide. And today there was a case in 1977 known as Trans World Airlines versus Hardison. And what happened was that the World Airlines, the way they worked on your schedule is it was based on seniority. So if you had more seniority, you got to pick what days you worked and what days you didn't work. So what happened was that he worked for an airline and then he got transferred to a different station. And there he had no seniority, but he was Jewish, so he needed Saturdays off, but they refused to give him Saturdays off because he didn't have the seniority to get it. So he sued them, and it ended up going to say that you can't discriminate against someone because of their religious preference in the workplace. And there's also been seen in today's world a connection between racial and religious discrimination, such as Arabs and Muslims. One often associate one with the other. And when you have random searches at airports, that's a discriminatory action. So to sum up, discrimination violates all the civil rights that all Americans possess. If you're an American, you cannot be discriminated against, and victims will not and have not always found justice. And so this raises the question of, will there ever be a society discrimination-free?